So, one solution that we have to hold on to in order to really determine our ability to remain true to the ultimate goal has to be to determine the faults of that which is not the ultimate goal. And we have to determine for ourselves what the wrong way to go is. We have to determine for ourselves what doesn't work. We have to determine for ourselves then the faults of cyclic existence. And that has to be very firm. Why am I saying this so much? Why don't I just get on with it? Why do I just keep going over this and going over this? Because this is where you can't take a shortcut. If you try to take a shortcut here, you will always go back to grasping onto straws. You will always go back into trying to satisfy yourself through some temporary means or through temporary gratification of one kind or another. And you will spend your entire spiritual career being disappointed. Just chronically disappointed. Anyway, the one thing that you cannot take shortcuts on is the understanding of the faults of cyclic existence. In the Buddha's teaching, one goes over these again and again and again. In fact, in preliminary practice, one does hundreds of thousands of accumulations or repetitions of certain mantras and prayers and activities. That this is the preliminary practice, which is the foundation of our path. For instance, there are certain mantras that one will repeat 100,000 times, and certain activities such as prostrations that one will accomplish 100,000 times. And preceding that activity, one always goes through a reading about what accomplishes enlightenment and what is a deterrent to enlightenment, about what is wrong with cyclic existence, and about what is pure and perfect about enlightenment. And one continually reads these things over and over again, and after you've done your practice sufficiently to accomplish hundreds of thousands of repetitions of these things, you do know these pieces by heart. You actually know them by heart and can chant them without the book. I find, though, that that does not ensure us that we know them in our hearts. To know them by heart and to know them in your heart are two different things. You have to take the time and the discipline and have to have the courage to really examine these things with tremendous depth, with tremendous intention. You must look at these simple things like turning the mind toward the posture of a renunciate, turning your mind away from the problems associated with cyclic existence. You must do it with such intensity, and the image that's described is like you must think of that truth as being the only door in a burning room. That to move through that truth is like the door of liberation, and that the rest of the room is burning, and you have to go through that. Can you imagine yourself in a burning room? Try to imagine yourself in a burning room. Try to do that for a minute. And there's one opening in the whole room. Of course, it wouldn't pass the fire code, but just pretend. There's one opening in the entire room, and it's a door. And the door is not burning. You can go through that door. You can go through that door. How much would you like that door? How much would you concentrate on that door? Your ears, your eyes, your mind, every particle of your consciousness, your feet, your guts, everything you have would be looking at that door. You would be aiming at that door. That door would be so important to you. Would you stop and say, I think I'll think about something else now? I don't think so. Or would you stop and say, gee, well, maybe I'll do something else before I go through the door. Remember, you're in a burning house. You have to think of abandoning cyclic existence with that kind of determination. And in order to understand that, you have to continually process through your mind and continually hold on to the understanding that nowhere in cyclic existence is there the safety of stability. Nowhere is there a naturally occurring relief. That one has to move through the door of liberation in a determined way, in a disciplined way, in order to have the experience of liberation. Just as in a burning house, which is burning with desire or burning with confusion, one has to go through the door in order to experience the purer, sweeter air. Really, we are required to cultivate that understanding until we have that kind of intensity about it. Until someone can show us, a little piece of cyclic existence. How about a little fame? How about a little fortune? How about a little beauty? And we would look at it and go, oh no, it's just not so hot for us anymore. It has to be like that. It doesn't mean that you would not be beautiful. If you're beautiful, you're beautiful. Or that you may not end up famous. If you end up famous, you end up famous. Or that you may not be fortunate. If you end up fortunate, you're fortunate. But that's not the door you're walking through. You have to learn. We must all learn the faults of cyclic existence. Learn, take advantage of what it can do for you, but don't mistake what it cannot do for you. It cannot give you freedom. In that regard, we should decide to achieve supreme realization. Just as the Buddha has achieved supreme realization, and others since him have achieved realization through that method. What is this realization? First of all, to understand what this realization is, one must understand that the realization was never described as a state that is beyond self. You hear that description in other religions. Transcendence, a state beyond self. Or a state that is called the higher self. Or a state that is labeled divine self, or even divinity. When the Buddha describes his experience of enlightenment, he describes it differently, saying simply, I am awake. To understand that awakeness, one must understand that according to the Buddha's teaching, the foundational, intrinsic, primordial wisdom nature, that which is our true nature, that which is unchanging, that which is never-ending, that which is free of all conditions, think of that. That which is pure and uncontrived, that which remains. That nature is in fact identical to and inseparable from the ultimate goal. One should never think that the Buddha's teaching amounts to doing certain things in order to get somewhere, in order to achieve, in order to build a spirituality, in order to arrive at a condition. One must understand that the Buddha has taught that we are in our nature, even as we are now, that primordial Buddha. That is the truth of our nature. That it is as that, unchangeable and unchanging. That this nature is completely free of all conditions. Therefore, even though we remain in a state of confusion, even now, fixated on self-nature as being inherently real, we cannot defile that nature. But like a crystal, we can pile defilements on top of it, while we will not harm its crystalline quality, its purity, its perfection. I used to have a crystal here somewhere. Now, in looking at this crystal, even if we were to pile mud on top of it, and what else? Disgusting things, feces on top of it, yuck, garbage on top of it, and pig poop on top of it, and what else? Think of something really horrible. Huh? Tar. All right, tar on top of it. Glue. Snot. We can get really nasty here. On top of this. And then on top of that we pour a good thick layer of concrete. We're not going to change the nature of this crystal one bit. And that our nature is like that. It remains clear and undefiled. What is the stuff that's being piled on top of this? This messy stuff. It's our own confused perception. That's it. The problem with confused perception, though, is that it goes hand in glove with habitual tendencies. Upon arriving at the condition of confused perception, one then begins to respond inappropriately. And to respond inappropriately in a neurotic way, and that is the very basis for neuroses, is inappropriate response, is it not? One has been acting neurotically, responding inappropriately to a condition that does not exist since time out of mind. Time out of mind is like a very long time. We're talking longer than 6 months. And you know how messed up you can get in 6 months. We're talking longer than one lifetime, and you know what good you've done in that lifetime. And we're talking about many, many lifetimes and beyond many, many lifetimes to a number of lifetimes that we can't even count. According to the Buddha, time out of mind, in which to arrive again and again and again, moment by moment, at confused conclusions based on which we get ourselves involved in erroneous decisions and are constantly involved, therefore, in a chain of habitual tendencies that we use as an excuse to give birth to more habitual tendencies. Because isn't the activity that you do, even at this moment, even at this stage in your life, based on assumptions that you have already come to, conclusions that you have already come to? All of the decisions that you make now are based on previous decisions, and they all continue as they have, with no end in sight. That's the stuff on top of the crystal. But the nature remains such, just like that, pure. It has other similarities to this crystal also. Look at the crystal. Look how absolutely clear it is. See that inside the crystal there is no color and no form. It is pure, spacious, and luminous. Can you see that? Look at the clear part of the crystal. You can see that it's pure and spacious and luminous. But what if I take my hand and put it in back of the crystal? What do you see? Doesn't it look like something's happened to the crystal? But has it? Doesn't it look like there's something in the crystal? Doesn't the crystal suddenly have a color? Put the crystal here in front of this red. Look what you see. That's the nature of the crystal, to reflect in that way. But it remains the same. Our nature is like that. It has the potential to do just what this crystal has done. hold, reflect, be involved with, be the medium in which certain kinds of perceptual experiences can be born. In fact, when we talk about the sphere of truth, which is our nature, all potential arises from the sphere of truth. It's the mother of all probability. The difference from relative view, between relative view and the spaciousness of this nature, is that in relative view, we tend to hold on to and to cling to perceptual experience as evidence of our identity. Whereas in our nature, one could think that the potential for experience could arise, just as this red is seen behind the crystal, you see? The potential for experience could arise. But the moment the condition passes, it is also spontaneously liberated. With our minds of relativity, do we do that? Of course not. Once we've been read, we have been affected by red. You see what I'm saying? Once we have had that experience within the exaggeration, or I should say, once we've had that opinion within the continuum of our experience of self, that continuum continues. And the only reason why it does is because it's a continuum. That's the only reason. But it still continues. Does it sound like a bunch of crazy spiritual double talk? Well, it is, because that's what we do. I mean, in one way it is. Interestingly, according to the teaching, it is not the experience or idea of self-nature that causes the confusion. It is the clinging that naturally occurs when one continues in the continuum that is the basis for confusion. In this nature, free and uncontrived, all is spontaneously generated and immediately liberated. That is the nature. But this experience of continuum, this fixation on ego identity and the clinging that occurs due to that, that is the fault of cyclic existence. All confusion comes from that. All confusion. But this nature remains unchanging. According to the teachings, we have been involved in neuroses since the first clinging or fixation to the idea of self-nature as being inherently real. Isn't that a joke? I mean, if you think about it, haven't we just, isn't like the popular current thing to do to run around trying not to be neurotic anymore? And we go to therapy, and we go to self-help groups, and we read magazines, and we read Psychology Today, and what else do we read? I don't know. We do all these things to try not to be neurotic. We answer quizzes in Cosmopolitan magazine, which I've always found to be a big help. And in this regard, we try, to really alleviate this neuroses thing. We get together and we talk out our feelings. And then we hold them in. And, we just do all these little things that we do. In order not to be neurotic, when you realize that according to that definition, every experience that we have, including the experience of trying to alleviate our neuroses, is based on a neurotic assumption. So what we have to do at that point is we have to decide, whoa, wait a minute, what is the girl to do? What shall we do now? Well, we have to decide, is there an end to this? Now, according to the Buddhist teaching, again, the end to this kind of confusion and suffering is indistinguishable from the nature itself. Indistinguishable from the nature itself. That what one should do is to remove all obstacles to pure view. Remember, we're imagining this crystal as being covered with all horse manure and pig manure and glue and tar and cement on top of it. But we know that the crystal is intact, that the nature is unchanging within all of that. Can you remember, can you fix in your mind that what's really on top of that nature is habitual tendency, neurotic fixation, clinging, desire, the exaggeration that is associated with the continuum of self, or of the perception of self-nature as being inherently real. That's the junk that's on top of this crystal. According to the Buddhist teaching, there is a cessation of suffering. That the elimination of desire is the elimination of suffering, but that the ultimate cessation of suffering is called enlightenment. The problem is that when you say that, you lose a lot of people, because enlightenment sounds like way out there. It sounds like, how could you ever get enlightened? What is this? I mean, what can you possibly understand about this? Again, the Buddha has taught us that in this regard, we should look at the experience of enlightenment as having three separate parts. One is the base or foundation, which is the nature itself. That is the basis for enlightenment. If you did not have that inherent Buddha nature, if that were not your nature, there would be no hope. It would not be possible to attain that enlightenment if that were not in fact your nature. Then there is the method or path by which one attains this enlightenment. The method or path would not be possible, once again, if this were not the inherent nature, your inherent nature. And the third part of this experience is the attainment or fruition, enlightenment itself. From our point of view, it seems as though, and you know why it seems this way? It's because we cannot experience our own primordial wisdom nature. We are so fixated on the continuum of self-nature, that is all we experience. That is the only thing we understand. It's all we have. So not knowing the spaciousness and undefiled reality of this nature, never having tasted, and one can only experience this nature by tasting. You cannot be taught this nature. You will never be taught about this nature. This nature is spaciousness. You can't describe spaciousness, because then you put it in a container of language, and it's no longer spacious. So that's why nature of mind teachings tend to want to trick you into an intuition rather than describe to you the nature. So this being suchness as it is, still, from our point of view, we have never tasted it. We have never experienced the spaciousness and pure, uncontrived luminosity that is that nature. So we can only experience continuum. That is the only experience that we have ever had, is continuum. From our point of view, it looks like there is the basis for the path, there is the path itself, and there is the fruition of the path. And that's why it looks like three different areas. But from the point of view of enlightenment, if one has achieved the fruit and therefore abides spontaneously in the spacious luminosity of one's primordial wisdom nature, without any contrivance, without any distinction, without any condition, in that conditionless state, there is no path and no seed or basis. There is only suchness. There is no distinction between the method and the basis and the fruit of the path of enlightenment. But from our point of view, we have to apply a technology. People have said to me, well, if this is true, why can't we just sit down and meditate and get it? My answer is, so go ahead. Have a good day. Because it won't work. From our point of view, we have to understand that the technology must be applied. And to not do so would be to say like, well, hey, I know there's a crystal under this big mass of concrete and shit. So I'm just going to visualize it and meditate on it and know that it's there. Well, the problem with that is that you'll never see it. You see? You really have to get out the big guns. You really have to get out some heavy-duty, chipping away phenomena here. And you have to start chipping away at it. And you know that spoons will not go through concrete. So you have to find the appropriate tool. It's one of those things, what do you call those? Jackhammers, right? Got to get a jackhammer. And then when you get down to, the pig shit part, well, you need like a shovel and a mask. And then when you get down to the glue part, maybe you have to melt that one away. And then whatever it is, for each kind of layer of stuff, and we have all of them, there is a particular technology that has to be applied. Ultimately, when one realizes the nature, one realizes that the technology and the implements themselves are indistinguishable from that nature. Why is that? Do you remember what I told you earlier? That in cyclic existence, there is no naturally occurring circumstance by which liberation will occur. Why? Go back to the original thinking. The original thinking is, what is cyclic existence? It is a continuum based on the erroneous supposition of self-nature as being inherently real. That's all it is. It's a continuum based on that confused idea. So within that, logically and truly, there is no naturally occurring relief. You can't wait for it to happen. You must apply the antidote. Again, the antidote that is applied when one utilizes, say, the path of Dharma and all of its different technologies in order to chip away the junk around the crystal, one understands eventually, when one reaches enlightenment, one understands that this path is indistinguishable from the basis, which is the Buddha nature, and from the goal, which is the Buddha nature. And the experience of suchness is simply that. But again, we are not yet in that place. We have not tasted that nature. We are still in the process of continuum. And in that process, we must apply a technology. What has this to do with spiritual fidelity? When one is true to oneself, one has to define self. If one is defining oneself by the confused idea of self-nature, ego, then one will never be able to apply the appropriate method, one will always try to be involved in a continual evaluation and reevaluation of the ego and a constant process of definition concerning the ego. But if one finally comes to understand the Buddha nature as one's intrinsic nature, one understands then also that the Buddha nature is the ultimate goal. And more than that, understands that the Buddha nature is the only ultimate object of refuge. By object of refuge, I mean it is the only object upon which one can rely and toward which one should move with great determination. With that kind of understanding, one will look toward this enlightenment, look toward this awakening to the primordial wisdom nature as being the only movement worth doing. To put it in a very common way, one could say it's the only game in town. If we allow ourselves to really understand the potency of such a decision through determining the nature or the fault of cyclic existence, and through then determining the validity of enlightenment as a goal, if one determines that to the depth of one's heart, till there's no more room for any more surety, and in order to do that, one has to practice that way every day, because we forget. We have a lot of years of continuum to overcome. Our forgetfulness is very deep and very wide and very persistent. But if we can practice in that way, to the depth of our heart, understanding that, there will literally not be a force on this earth strong enough to cause us to move away from our determined goal. There will be no temptation. None. Nothing would work. But on the other hand, if we don't do this and try to walk a spiritual path, no force, including the Buddha himself, could force us to stay on that path. Nothing could do that. Think about what a position of responsibility that puts us in. But think about what a position of potency that is as well. The idea being that basically the ball really is in our court, but not in a superficial way. If you think, oh, well, okay, the ball's in my court, so I'm just going to decide here and now that I'm going to stay on the path and I'm just going to be real tough about this and no one's going to get me off it. You are tempting fate. Believe me. You are asking for major big-time trouble. If, on the other hand, you adhere to the teaching and establish your firmness through really understanding the faults of cyclic existence, and through really understanding the benefits of enlightenment, and through simply abandoning anything other than that, by practicing spiritual fidelity, being true to your nature, accepting that your nature, that ultimate Buddha nature, is the only true guru and the only true object of refuge, and accepting that with your whole heart, and not letting anything get in your face other than that, no matter how appealing or beautiful or seductive it might be, in the way that beauty can be seductive. Sensuality can be seductive. Power can be seductive. Do you understand, however, that none of them are a problem in themselves unless you cling to them? Isn't that odd? Because even in our last moments, as we're gasping and fighting for air, when we're going down for the third count, surrender. When we're getting ready to really be renunciates, we still want to say, it's because of money that I have this problem. Or, it's because of power that I have this problem. Or, it's because of sex that I have this problem. No, it's not because of any of those things. It's because you cling to them. And even the idea that it's because of self that I have this problem. Is that not the stupidest statement you've ever heard? It's because of self that I have this problem? You're not like clinging to that, are you? No. But anyway, it's the clinging that is the problem. And it's really the clinging that's the hardest to rid ourselves of. In order to truly practice, we have to have an unquestioning, heartfelt devotion for this precious awakening. From the depth of our heart, we actually must learn to cry out for this precious awakening, even until tears come to our eyes. We should for ourselves examine the faults of cyclic existence and see for ourselves the suffering of others and our own confusion. And from the depth of our heart, reach and determine for ourselves that we will not be without that precious awakening. We should satisfy nothing but the causes that will bring about that awakening. Nothing else is our job. Nothing else matters. And really, when you think about how short life is, nothing else is really happening. But that nature abides spontaneously, and within that nature all is liberated. That is the nature of that nature. When we see these objects of refuge, for instance, in a temple like this, we see statues of Guru Rinpoche, we see stupas, we see mandalas, we see beautiful pictures and beautiful tankas, we see our own root teachers, our own gurus, precious gurus. We must understand that in that understanding of the threefold path, of the threefold accomplishment, being the same, being indistinguishable from the ultimate point of view, everything that we see, every picture of the Buddha, every stupa, every statue, every mandala that is representative of the celestial palace or the activity of the Buddhas, every element that we see here, including our own teachers, we must understand to be our own nature calling to us, speaking to us. Not that we're far away, not that there is separation, but ultimately we will come to see that this very path, these very activities, these very teachings, from the point of view of pure view, are our own voice. The basis for practice, the truth of practice and the fruit of practice are the same, indistinguishable in the Buddha nature. And if that is the case, then you listen to your voice and be true to yourself, which is that nature.
Juling